So I will use some of what it talks about in here, but I'm also going to bring in some things that I think are important that are not in this. But I need to give you a little bit of a warning because this is going to be a difficult, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes between today and tomorrow. And it's even graphic at times. And I struggle every year when I'm preparing to teach this because it's emotionally draining for me. And it's hard to hear as well because this is so gruesome. And I know you don't believe this, but you will someday. And you're so young. Um, it, it, it is hard to put that burden on you. But at the same time, I believe we need to do it. I think we need to understand the lengths to which both God and Jesus were willing to go to have a relationship with you, to save you, to save me. And if we whitewash the cross of Christ, I believe we do a disservice to Him and to ourselves. So this is going to be difficult and gruesome, but I think we need to hear it. So we've talked about the betrayal and the arrest and the trial before Annas and Caiaphas, the Sanhedrin, and Peter's denial. And now it's early in the morning, and very early in the morning. And they take Jesus and they force him to walk across the city to Pilate's place, his palace. And they need Pilate because they want him to be executed. And they have no authority to execute him. They have authority to try him, they have authority to punish him, but they don't have the authority to kill him. And so they need Pilate for that. They need the Roman governor for that. And so Pilate was the governor at this time, representing the Roman government, and they went to him, Pontius Pilate, to get Jesus accused of something that he could be crucified for. And he didn't live in Jerusalem. He actually lived in Galilee. And he only came to Jerusalem occasionally. But he always came when there was a big feast to make sure that the people didn't riot. And when he was there, he stayed in the royal palace. And when they get there, when the Jewish leadership gets there, they go no farther than the front door. They refuse to go into his house because it would defile them. If they went into a Gentile's house, they wouldn't be able to celebrate the Passover because they would have to go through a purification ritual for a number of days before they could do that. And in so doing, they would miss the Passover. Does anybody see irony? They won't step foot in a Gentile household because it will defile. And yet, they're framing an innocent man and wanting him to be executed. Doesn't that defile them? And it does. But they don't see it that way. And that should give you a sense of how far from God they really were. So Jesus is going to face Pilate in this part of the story. I need to do something really fast though. So then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, unclean, but could eat the Passover. So Pilate went outside to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Do they bring an accusation? No. They just say, "Do you think that would work?" Like if a teacher took someone to Mr. Hood and Mr. Hood said, "What did she do? What did he do?" And the teacher just said, "Well, I wouldn't have bribed you. He didn't do something bad." That's not going to work, is it? But that's what they're saying. They're saying, we wouldn't have brought him to you if he didn't do something. But they're not telling him what he did. And that's because he did nothing to deserve it. And they know it. So Pilate said to them, "Take him to yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." So now they're tipping their hand again. We just want him dead. And we can't do that on our own. This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. Remember when Jesus said, "When I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to me"? And remember, I told you that idea, that phrase of being lifted up, was a euphemism for crucifixion. And so only the Romans crucified. The Jews did not crucify. So this is what Jesus meant, and he knew that he would be crucified. Pilate then is going to have a conversation with Jesus, and he asks about his kingdom. Are you a king? And he asks about his kingdom. And he says, "My kingdom is from another world." And he says, "Then you are a king," to Jesus. And then Jesus responds with, "You say I'm a king." And so they have this conversation, and it ends up with Pilate, because Jesus talks about everyone who is on the side of truth listens to me. And Pilate ends it with, "What is truth?" Kind of a throwaway statement or question. The odd thing is, though, that truth is standing right in front of him. "I am the way and the truth and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me." And he didn't realize it. Truth was standing right in front of him. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered him, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And as I said, it's an interesting question, considering that Jesus is truth. So Pilate goes back to them and pronounces Jesus innocent. So for the first time, Pilate says this man is innocent. After he said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, I find no guilt in him. But you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So who do you want me to release to you, the king? So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? And they cried out again, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. So they choose Barabbas to be, and based on the reading, Pilate thought, they'll release Jesus. I mean, Barabbas was a bad guy, and Jesus was a good guy. It makes perfect sense. But that's not what they wanted. And so Jesus has the Romans scourge Jesus. And that's a whipping of sorts. We'll talk about it. But then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. Now, Pilate didn't, but he made sure that Jesus was flogged. It was against Roman law to have someone flogged without being um, uh, found having a crime. He was declared innocent. He was not declared guilty. He had to be declared guilty in order to be flogged. Pilate flogged him. Jews, when they flogged people, had a law that said you could not flog someone more than 40 times. And so their law said you can scourge someone 39 times. They would only give 39 lashes just in case there was a miscount. They didn't want to break the law. Although they were more than willing to flog, that the Romans flog. The Romans, on their part, were pretty sadistic. And so we don't know how many lashes Jesus endured. It may have been way more than 39, because they had no law against them. And so they were whipped by a sturdy, short, it was called a flagellum, a short whip, with leather thongs on it, and then within the leather thongs and around the leather thongs, there were bits of bone and metal and heavy iron balls that would pummel the person who was being whipped. And it was a very heavy whip, and as they brought it down on the full force of a man's shoulders and back and buttocks and legs, it would begin with contusions, with bruising. But as the torture went on, the sharp parts would dig into the flesh, and the bruises would break open and begin to bleed. And by the end, the person's back was literally shredded, hanging in ribbons on their back. And at this point, when the Romans determined that the man was near death, the whipping stopped. And the person was allowed to slump to the pavement. But in Jesus' case, the Romans see a joke. They have this Jew that's claiming to be king. And so they take a bathrobe, basically, and they put it on his shoulders. And they take thorns. And if you want to look back in the back of my room, a friend of mine who went to Israel brought me those back. And the crown of thorns would have been made from something very much like that. And they dig it into his scalp, and copious bleeding. The scalp is a very, um, very venous place, and he would have been bleeding down his face and his head. And they pretend to mock him and hail him as a king. Hail, King of the Jews. Um, and he was presented before the people and mocked by the people, as they as Pilate once again said, "I find no fault." So now 2 times Pilate has declared him innocent. Pilate was a cold, cruel-hearted man, and he had allowed, against Roman law, this man to be scourged, and to be found guilty, even though he was never found guilty in the court. And twice now, Pilate has declared the innocence of Jesus. So Jesus was illegally flogged, both according to Jewish and to Roman law. And he will be illegally executed, both in Jewish and Roman law. But still the crowd isn't satisfied. At least Pilate thought, well, they'll be satisfied with this, but they weren't. So a third time, Pilate declares Jesus innocent. And the Jews startle him by saying that Jesus claimed to be God. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man," and basically he's saying, look how pitiful he is. Isn't this enough? Hasn't he endured enough? So for a third time, he is declared innocent, and it wasn't enough. And so Jesus is going to go to that cross. Here's John 19, 9 through 16. He entered his headquarters, meeting Pilate again, and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you know that I have the authority to release you and the authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. Now, it was the day of the preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour, about noon. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." So now he's afraid, because now he thinks that they're going to tell Caesar what he's done, that he hasn't punished Jesus, and he was already in trouble with Rome. And so he didn't want to lose his position, and that's probably the real reason why he had Jesus crucified. They cried out, so behold your king, is what he says. They cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, the leadership answered, we have no king but Caesar. These are Jews, and they are claiming Caesar as their king, not God. That is blasphemy. So he delivered him over to be crucified. So we'll pick up here tomorrow. Waiting patiently.